Today's episode is part one of a two-part series on blurred minds, where we discuss the distinction between gaslighting and authentic memory distortions. How easy is it for our memories to become distorted, and can everyday memory distortions feed into the perception of gaslighting? Let's find out. All right, I'm here with JB, the great Joey Barnet.
Oh, not great, but hello.
Yeah, and we're here with Cracking the Shell. So we're here for another episode of Cracking the Shell on psychological science, and today we are going to talk about gaslighting.
Okay.
And false memories.
Interesting.
Yeah. Before we get started, I just want to do a little experiment.
All right.
All right, so if you're listening to this, you can play along, and hopefully you will, but I'm going to read a list of words, and then just have you kind of hang on to those for a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, you ready? Here we go. Sour, sweet, candy, bitter, good, honey, child, quiet, bad, salt. So we'll come back to those words after a bit, and I give you all a little memory test to see how many of those words that you remember.
Okay.
Do you know what gaslighting is?
I think I do. I think it depends on like how people define it, right? I mean, I think there's probably different definition. I think I have a working definition of it.
All right, give me a working definition of it.
I mean, when I think of gaslighting, like when I think of, what I've read, and especially like in like popular level constructions or popular level works on gaslighting, I tend to think of it as maybe like a form of manipulation, almost like a form of psychological manipulation, when one person is trying to basically cause another person to doubt their memory, which is, I guess what we're talking about today, doubt their perception, doubt their memory, and maybe even like doubt, their sense of reality, So that's kind of what I think of it, but I'm sure there's other definitions of it.
No, I think that's generally what the way it's characterized, and the essence of it is lies in the intention of the person who's instigating it, right?
Right,
And so no, you didn't say that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If someone says like, that never happened.
No, it didn't.
Right, it didn't happen. Or
No.
you're imagining
things,
right?
Right.
Or you're
Now,
you're overreacting.
So what's the difference then between gaslighting and a genuine false memory? So say we have different memories of some experience.
Okay.
And there's some objective reality, and you have some representation, I have some representation, and I insist that the way I'm thinking about it is the correct one.
Okay.
And I'm like, no, Joey, you're wrong.
Yeah.
No, we did not go to the Grand Canyon together.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, Mike, you were there. You were there when I was at I swear we were at the, and you're like, no, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate between an instance in which that conversation takes place when I'm not trying to, setting aside the manipulation part, right? You have to infer, the manipulation part is an inference on the intentions of the other person. But how do you differentiate between a case in which the thing that I am trying or you're trying to remember is a genuine memory, but falsely remembered, versus an intentional sort of manipulation of one's experience?
That's a hard question. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what that's part of the crux of what we're talking about today. And I think,
So it turns out there's a lot of work on false memories, and it's incredibly easy to induce or experience various forms of memory errors or memory biases.
That's really interesting. I mean, I want to say, and I'm definitely not an expert in this area. I've read a little bit of the research in this area, but I want to say, when I read things about gaslighting and manipulation, it seems like the word intention is salient, right? When we're talking about gaslighting, right? But then when we're talking about like false memories or fake memories, I mean, obviously, people don't necessarily intend to have a fake memory or a false memory. It just kind of happens because we're fallible, and we make mistakes,
we make mistakes, and that this is just the way the brain. Let's just demonstrate the false memory part.
Okay.
So earlier in the episode, right at the beginning, I gave a list of words.
Yep.
There's a good chance that that people will have recalled a word that actually wasn't on that list of words I mentioned. So the words I mentioned were sour, sugar, candy, bitter, good, honey, child, quiet, bad, salt. And, what's interesting about these words is they're all semantically related to what's called a common associate or a critical lure. And that critical lure is the word sweet.
Wait, you didn't say that?
No, I didn't say the word sweet.
Wait, really? Yeah. No, I'm actually serious. Like, you didn't actually say that?
No, the word sweet was not on that list.
Wow.
You can.
Is that a fake memory? There you go.
Did you actually do it?
Yeah, I did it.
Oh, well, that's cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, so it works.
It works in 75% of people. It's actually very common.
Well, I'm part of the 75.
Yeah. Well, so this is a demonstration I use in class all the time, and it turns out that it's incredibly easy to get people to think this word sweet occurred on that list, and they will not only recall it or say that it was on there, but they will say so with high confidence. And so here we have completely, not really fabricated, but sort of created memory, self-created by the person, that it's just a function of the way the mind works, right? So you're saying all these words that happen to be related to the word sweet, it gets activated, and then at retrieval, you're like, oh, that word sweet, that must have been on there too. So you write it down, and it seems like it probably was.
Wow,
when in fact it wasn't. Really easy to do these things. And so when we're talking about something like an argument or the assertion that someone is gaslighting you, it really calls attention to this issue of, can we differentiate between an authentic memory error versus intention to manipulate someone, right? By getting them to question their memory, right? And so you may question your memory, just as you did. In this case, obviously, I wasn't trying to manipulate you, except experimentally.
It was just a
psychological experiment. When we're in those situations where we think some event has happened, or we're arguing over the reality of some event or whatever it is, it really can be very challenging to differentiate between those things. And I understand that you have an example. This what is it? A hot air balloon?
Yeah. There was a pretty famous study in 2002. Wade and colleagues, they did the study, Wade et al. 2002. Basically, they did the study where they showed people photographs of themselves in a hot air balloon back when they were a child. The interesting thing is that the photo was fabricated. It wasn't a real photo, but they told the participants initially that was them. The interesting thing was that after they had shown the participants the photo, 50% of them insisted that it was them, even after the researcher told them that it was fake. So even after the researcher said, hey, this photo isn't actually real, it was just like a experiment, they said, no, I remember that. Like, I really have a real memory. So that's interesting. I do think it kind of that kind of shows just how common, how it's really not that difficult actually to kind of succumb to a false memory, right? I mean, wow.
Yeah. Well, there's this other phenomena, a set of processes. One is called source monitoring, another is called reality monitoring, right? And the idea with source monitoring is, say you learn a phone number from a colleague, or you learn some fun fact from somebody, right? I mean, if we're really good at maintaining where we learn our facts from, we're good at source monitoring, right? So I learned this fact about this Wade study from Joey Barnet on this podcast. I have some context to go along with that. And if someone asks you, oh, where did you learn that from? I can say, well, I learned it from Joey. But it's very common for people to misattribute source, right? So I might, over time, lose the contextual information where I learned this really cool fact, and I attribute it to, say, Ben Jones or Abby Nicolas or someone else. I'm like, well, Abby told me this really cool. Hey, Joey, Abby told me this really cool story about the hot air balloon picture, and well, that would be a source monitoring error.
Okay.
But there's also this other thing called a reality monitoring error, and it turns out that people can be relatively easily convinced that they experienced an event. This is very similar to the hot air balloon study. Very easily convinced that an imagined event actually occurred. So this was another study, and I think maybe by the same authors as the hot air balloon, because I think one of the co-authors on that was the main author on this, Marianne Gary.
Yep.
And what they did was they gave people the task of imagining some event. And I can't remember what the events are right off the top of my head, but essentially they had to imagine that some event took place that they were engaged in or something like that. And then they brought them back in the lab a couple of weeks later, and they said, oh, have you ever engaged in these sorts of activities? And what they found was that when they were asked about events that they had been required to imagine having engaged in. They reported higher confidence that they had previously engaged in those activities. So in other words, just merely the act of imagining having engaged in this activity made it seem to these same individuals that they had engaged in those. And so this is like a failure of our ability to differentiate between things that we imagine and things that we actually did. It's actually kind of like the hot air balloon.
That is like the hot air balloon.
I imagine myself having done this because now I've shown you the visual picture, and now I can't differentiate between did I do it or did I just think I did it? Did I just imagine doing it? And so it's really easy to get people to convince themselves they've engaged in these things. What else do you have?
Well, yeah, I'm curious, what do you think are, we've been talking about this. What do you think are the, I guess, the implications in terms of like, why do we commit so many memory errors? Like, why do human beings, why do we succumb to so many errors? Aristotle once said that we are rational animals. He said that one of the things that differentiates us from other species, other animals, is that we're rational. But now we're talking about false memories, and we're talking about how easy it is for us to like make mistakes and how fallible we are. Like, why is this the case?
No, it's a really good question. I don't have a good answer for it. It does seem when we experience an event, what we're encoding is a very rich representation of that event. When we imagine that event, what we are imagining is a rich event, right? So, like if I have you imagine going to a friend's wedding, you don't just imagine like two people with a black background, right? What you engage in is a more elaborate representation of that event, right? And you may even place yourself there, right? And so what you're essentially building is a very rich, contextually rich representation of that. The problem with memory, of course, is that, some details are missing, we lose information over time, or we can't reinstantiate that information. And so what happens is that the ability to differentiate between those memories degrades because we lose some of the richness of the contextual details that are necessary for us to determine or distinguish between real and false memories.
Fascinating.
That's a very sort of colloquial way of describing that. It's not, I wouldn't write that up for scientific publication.
Well, but I think it's helpful to like conceptualize. I think it's helpful for just conceptualizing it.
Yeah. So some of the concepts here are source monitoring, like how can we sort of monitor where we learn information, reality monitoring, like how can we differentiate between things that are real versus not real, or imagination or imaginary versus not imaginary. This concept of imagination inflation is this idea that our confidence in imagined events as if they really happened increases after imagination, and then this idea of a false memory. But there's some other interesting connections here to things that you're familiar with. So you familiar with some of the compliance studies of what's his name, Cialdini?
Yeah, Cialdini. Yep.
What's his first name?
Robert
Cialdini. Yeah. Are you familiar with the cable television study?
I think I've heard of it. Yeah. 1982.
1982. You want to say it? Or you want me to?
Go for it.
All right.
We can fill it out together. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know all the details. But essentially what they did in one of their studies is they went door to door and they asked people to, they were essentially door-to-door salesmen in this study. Right. And they had them essentially imagine what it would be like to have cable television. So this is 1982. So this is back in the day.
Not everyone had
it. So it was a very unique thing. And so they essentially had people imagine what it would be like to have cable television. And then, I don't know, what is it, a couple of months later, they came back and re-interviewed the people.
Yeah.
And if I remember right,
they're more likely to purchase it, right?
They were more likely to have purchased the cable television.
There you go.
If they had engaged in the imagination.
Yep. And Cialdini did a lot of stuff with like persuasion and compliance. And just getting people to.
So imagination is a very powerful tool, and in the context of gaslighting, right? I mean, you can think about it being used for good or used for bad, and the problem with some of these things that we're talking about, where there is literal intention to manipulate someone, that's when the gaslighting part comes up.
And it's terrible. It's like taking advantage of the fact that we do as human beings make mistakes. And
that's
so
right. That's right.
It's definitely taking advantage of our fallibility, right? Our just our proneness to memory errors, right? That's interesting. I think it's helpful, like just for our listeners and just for everyone. I think it's helpful to kind of conceptualize, to think about gaslighting in this context of like false memories and fake memories. I think not everyone kind of has that connection, right?
Yeah.
Has the connection between gaslighting and false memory.
And the other side of it, when we first started thinking about this episode, one of the ways I was thinking about it was that, how do you really differentiate between me suggesting that something happened when it didn't,
right,
as being an instance of gaslighting or an instance of error? But on the other hand, there's also this other aspect of it, which is if I am being very intentional. Now we're in the realm of the gaslighting is not only intentionally sort of manipulating someone, but because we know all these things can be induced, all these memory errors can be induced, you can think about it as actually changing the underlying memory of that target victim in this case, right?
Yeah.
And so having people engage in those imagined tasks, repeating something over and over and over again, these are things that can ultimately in the long run change the underlying memory representation, right? So some of these propaganda techniques, getting compliance.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, people certainly, people unfortunately certainly weaponize this,
Yeah. All right. So I guess this is a good place to interject here and kind of revisit our false memory experiment from the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, let's revisit it.
All right. So this was totally by accident. We weren't planning this, but it turns out I made a mistake. And instead of demonstrating a false memory, we actually ended up demonstrating an instance of
gaslighting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So back at the beginning of the episode, I read off a list of words to Joey and later asked him to retrieve them.
Yep.
Embedded in that list was a whole bunch of words that were related to sweet. And at the time, I thought I didn't say the word sweet. And Joey was insistent that I had, in fact, said the word sweet. But
right. Yeah, I seriously thought I heard it. And so I said, I really thought you did. I insisted, and I actually found it rather incredulous when you insisted that you hadn't,
Right. And so it turned out that instead of demonstrating a false memory, we actually demonstrated something slightly different, which is an instance of unintentional gaslighting, I guess, right? We both had representations of this event, and we remembered different features from it.
Right. And so basically, you gaslit me, although it was unintentional. But I think that, this situation that happened rather unintentionally actually perfectly illustrates, what we've been talking about in this episode. So we thought it'd be interesting and fun to kind of put this in here, right?
That's right. And so when I said re-roll the tape, well, we re-rolled the tape, and in fact, that's how we found out that I had made a mistake. So, Joey, I'm sorry for gaslighting you.
Oh, no worries. It was unintentional.
We're gonna have to pick this one up and maybe make it a two-parter. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds great. I think there's a lot more we can cover, specifically in relation to maybe some of the research on gaslighting.
I think that'd be great. I think we ought to bring Abby in for this one. What
Absolutely.
Do you think? All right, we'll pick it up then. All right.
Testing 1 2 3. Gaslighting. I got gaslit.
You got gaslit.
I did.
You did get gaslit. So let's do some gaslighting.
Okay.